She sat in that courtroom,
Mr.
listening
Holloway,
to her husband call her
based on
crazy,
the overwhelming
unstable,
evidence,
unfit to
this
raise her own
court
children.
finds you
For
guilty on
14 months,
all
he had been building a
counts.
case against her, photographing wine bottles, paying neighbors to lie, documenting every small mistake she ever made as a mother. He thought he had won. He thought she would crumble. But Daniel Holloway made one fatal mistake. He underestimated his wife. Because while he was busy destroying her reputation, Maggie was quietly buying the law firm where he worked. Every email he sent plotting
Is
against
there
her,
nowhere else to
company
go?
property, every
You
strategy
did the right
session with
thing
his
coming
lawyer,
here.
conducted in
We'll
conference rooms
figure
she
this
owned,
out.
and when the judge revealed the truth in open court,
The
the
funds were
look on his
clearly
face was worth
diverted on the
every
3rd
tear
of
she had
March.
cried in
I
secret.
told you I
This
didn't
is the
do this.
story of a
Let
woman who
go of me.
refused to be a
Order in
victim,
the court.
a mother who
Sit
fought
down,
back with
sir.
patience, intelligence, and a plan so perfect, her husband never saw it coming. Stay with me until the end, trust me. You do not want to miss how this unfolds. Your Honor, my client has documented evidence that Margaret Holloway is mentally unstable and poses a direct threat to the well-being of their children. The words sliced through the courtroom like a blade through silk. Maggie felt them hit her chest before her brain could process their meaning. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing against her skin, making it hard to breathe. She sat frozen at the defendant's table, her spine rigid against the unforgiving wooden chair. The courtroom fell silent. Even the ancient air conditioning unit that had been rattling in the corner seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere behind her, she heard a woman gasp softly. Christine Palmer's hand found Maggie's wrist under the table. Her grip was tight, reassuring. A lifeline in a room that had suddenly become hostile territory. Do not react, that grip said. Do not give them what they want. Maggie forced herself to breathe, in through the nose. Hold four counts, out through the mouth, the way Dr. Catherine Wells had taught her during those long sessions in her quiet office with the lavender diffuser and the soft gray couch. The way she had been breathing for 6 months since the night her entire world collapsed around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glow. The American flag hung limply beside the judge's bench. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her machine, waiting. Daniel sat across the aisle at the plaintiff's table. His charcoal suit was perfectly pressed, not a single wrinkle marring the expensive Italian fabric. His silver cufflinks caught the fluorescent light, winking like conspiratorial eyes. He had always been meticulous about his appearance. Image mattered to Daniel Holloway. It was the substance underneath that was rotten to the core. He did not look at her. He had not looked at her once since they entered the courtroom 45 minutes ago. His eyes remained fixed on his attorney, on the judge, on the paper spread before him. Anywhere but at the woman he had promised to love and cherish until death parted them. 17 years of marriage, 2 children, a lifetime of shared memories, and he could not even look at her. Theodore Knox, Daniel's attorney, was a silver-haired man with the practiced gravitas of someone who had been destroying lives in family court for 30 years. His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty, as if every word he spoke was carved in stone. He spread photographs across his table like a card dealer in a casino, each one a calculated move in a game Maggie was only beginning to understand. If it pleased the court, Knox continued, his voice dripping with false concern, we have documented Mrs. Holloway's erratic behavior over the past 14 months. Missed appointments with her children's schools. Excessive alcohol consumption that has escalated to concerning levels. A prescription for anxiety medication that she obtained without informing her husband, suggesting an attempt to hide mental health struggles. Maggie's throat tightened. The prescription. She had gotten it 3 weeks after finding the text on Daniel's phone. 3 weeks of pretending everything was normal while her insides turned to ash. 3 weeks of smiling across the dinner table at a man who was planning her destruction. The medication had been the only thing keeping her functional during those dark days, and now it was being used as evidence against her. Knox held up a photograph, turning it so the gallery could see. This shows the recycling bin outside the Holloway residence. As you can see, there are multiple wine bottles. This photograph was taken on a Tuesday morning, suggesting consumption on a weeknight when Mrs. Holloway would have been responsible for the children. Christine stood, her chair scraping against the floor. Objection, Your Honor. The contents of a recycling bin are hardly evidence of anything except that someone in the household enjoys wine with dinner. Furthermore, there is no evidence establishing when these bottles were consumed or by whom. Judge Evelyn Ashford peered over her reading glasses. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her early 60s with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her black robe seemed to absorb all the light in the room, making her appear larger than her small frame suggested. Deep lines bracketed her mouth, evidence of decades spent listening to the worst of human behavior. "Sustained," she said, her voice crisp. "Mr. Knox, I hope you have something more substantial than garbage photography. This court's time is valuable." A few people in the gallery chuckled nervously. Knox's smile did not waver, but something flickered in his eyes. Irritation, perhaps, or calculation. "Of course, Your Honor. I merely wish to establish a pattern. But if the court prefers, I will move to more direct evidence." He reached for another document, his movements deliberate and theatrical. "I call attention to Exhibit B, a sworn affidavit from the Holloway's neighbor, Mrs. Dorothy Chen, stating that she witnessed Miss Holloway stumbling to her car on the morning of February 12th. Mrs. Chen expresses concern about Mrs. Holloway operating a vehicle in such a state, particularly when she was presumably on her way to retrieve her children. Maggie remembered that morning with painful clarity. She had twisted her ankle on the ice while bringing in the newspaper. The frost had been particularly thick that day, coating everything in a treacherous glaze. She had limped to her car to pick up Lucas from his sleepover at his friend Tyler's house. That was it. That was the great scandal Knox was presenting to the court. But she remembered something else, too. Dorothy Chen, standing at her kitchen window, watching. Dorothy Chen, who had always been friendly until about 3 months ago. Dorothy Chen, who had started avoiding Maggie's eyes at the mailbox. Now she understood why. Knox droned on, his voice filling the courtroom like poisonous gas. More photographs, more affidavits. A teacher's aide who had noticed Maggie seemed distracted at a parent-teacher conference. A pediatrician's receptionist who claimed Maggie had been short-tempered when rescheduling an appointment. Every forgotten soccer cleat was presented as evidence of maternal negligence. Every glass of wine was proof of alcoholism. Every moment of human imperfection was being twisted into proof that she was unfit to raise her own children. Maggie's hands trembled in her lap. She looked down and realized she had shredded her tissue into confetti, tiny white pieces scattered across the dark wood of the table like snow on a winter morning. She always did this when she was stressed. At her father's funeral 3 years ago, her hands had produced a small mountain of tissue fragments. The night Daniel told her he needed space to think, she had destroyed an entire box of Kleenex without realizing it. Her hands always betrayed her anxiety even when her face remained calm. Daniel knew this. He had probably mentioned it to Knox. Another weakness to be exploited. She swept the tissue pieces into her palm, depositing them in her purse. Christine's hand squeezed her wrist again. "Steady. We planned for this." "Furthermore," Knox was saying, "we have obtained Mrs. Holloway's pharmacy records through proper legal channels. These records show that she filled a prescription for Lexapro, an antidepressant commonly used for anxiety disorders, approximately 5 months ago. She never informed her husband of this prescription, suggesting she was aware her mental state had deteriorated to a point requiring medical intervention." Deteriorated. The word made her sound like a crumbling building, a car rusting in a junkyard. Not a woman whose husband had been having an affair. Not a mother trying desperately to hold herself together for her children. Judge Ashford made a note on her legal pad. Her expression was unreadable. Daniel finally looked at her. His expression was one of practiced concern. The slight furrow of his brow, perfectly calibrated to convey worry without aggression. The downturned corners of his mouth, suggesting sadness rather than triumph. She had seen him practice this face in the bathroom mirror before court appearances. The concerned husband, the reluctant whistleblower, the man who only wanted what was best for everyone. But his eyes told a different story. Behind the performance, behind the carefully constructed mask, she saw satisfaction. He was enjoying this, watching her squirm, watching his carefully constructed narrative take shape. "This is what you get for not making it easy," those eyes said. "This is what happens when you fight back." "I am not crazy," she thought, the words forming in her mind with crystalline clarity. I know what I saw on that phone. I know what he is doing. I know exactly who he is. The thought steadied her. She sat up straighter, unclenched her jaw, let her hands rest flat on the table, no longer shaking. Christine squeezed her wrist one more time. Hold on, we are just getting started. Judge Ashford glanced at the clock on the wall. Mr. Knox, I'm going to call for a brief recess. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes. The gallery began to buzz with whispered conversations as people stood to stretch their legs. Patricia Holloway, Daniel's mother, sat in the front row wearing a cream-colored Chanel suit and a smile that barely concealed her triumph. She had never liked Maggie. Too common, she had once told Daniel when she thought Maggie was not listening. Not the right sort of family. Your father would have wanted better for you, Percy. Maggie's father had been a judge himself, respected and beloved in the legal community. But he had come from nothing, the son of a factory worker who had put himself through law school on scholarships and determination. That working-class background was apparently an unforgivable sin in the Holloway family tree. Patricia caught Maggie's eye and held her gaze for a long moment. Her smile widened fractionally. Enjoy your last moments with my grandchildren, that smile said. Soon they will be where they belong. Maggie did not look away. She held Patricia's stare until the older woman finally broke eye contact, turning to whisper something to the woman beside her. Small victory. But she would take what she could get. As Judge Ashford gathered her papers, preparing to leave the bench, her eyes met Maggie's for just a moment. Something passed between them. Recognition. But of what? Maggie could not read the expression before it vanished behind the judge's professional mask. The bailiff announced the recess. People began to stand, to stretch, to murmur among themselves. The court reporter saved her work and reached for her water bottle. Knox was already deep in conversation with Daniel, their heads bent together like conspirators. Maggie did not move. She sat perfectly still, staring at the photographs spread across the plaintiff's table. Wine bottles photographed in morning light. A twisted ankle turned into evidence of drunkenness. A prescription for anxiety medication obtained by a woman whose husband was systematically destroying her from the inside out. 14 months. He had been building this case for 14 months. Photographing wine bottles, documenting missed appointments, cultivating witnesses like Dorothy Chen. The worst part was not the accusations. It was realizing she recognized this strategy. She had seen Daniel use it before on clients' spouses. She had sat across from him at dinner while he bragged about his courtroom victories. You have to establish a pattern, he had explained once, swirling bourbon in a crystal glass, his voice warm with satisfaction. Doesn't matter if the pattern's real, it just has to look real to the judge. Most people leave a trail of minor imperfections through their daily lives. You just have to know how to connect the dots. She had nodded and smiled and refilled his glass. She had even offered suggestions during those early years when she still believed he was a good man doing difficult work. When she still thought family law was about protecting children, not weaponizing them against their parents. Now she was on the receiving end of her own advice. Christine leaned close, her voice barely above a whisper. How are you holding up? Maggie's voice came out steadier than she expected. He's using the Henderson playbook, point by point. Christine's eyebrows rose. The Henderson case, Daniel's masterpiece, the one he still bragged about at cocktail parties. A father who had been destroyed in court by a barrage of minor incidents, made to look like a pattern of abuse and neglect. He had lost custody of 3 children based on evidence no more substantial than what Knox was presenting now. The father had killed himself 6 months later. Daniel had expressed regret at the funeral, but Maggie had seen the gleam of professional pride in his eyes. That explains the photography obsession, Christine muttered. He's been documenting everything for over a year. This is premeditated character assassination. Everything, Maggie thought. Every glass of wine, every moment of human weakness, every ordinary failure magnified into monstrosity. But he did not know what she had been documenting in return. He did not know about the folder on his laptop labeled Exit Strategy, the one she had found 3 months ago. He did not know she had made copies of everything, and he certainly did not know that 6 months ago, while he sat in his corner office building his case against her, she had been quietly building something of her own, something that would destroy him completely. The recess ended. Judge Ashford returned to the bench, her black robe swirling around her ankles. The gallery settled. The court reporter positioned her fingers over the keys. "Mr. Knox," the judge said, her voice carrying the weight of 30 years on the bench, "you may continue, but I suggest you move beyond lifestyle photography and present something of actual relevance to custody determination." Knox's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. A crack in the facade. "Of course, Your Honor, I would like to call my first witness, Mr. Daniel Holloway." Daniel rose, buttoning his suit jacket with the smooth confidence of a man who had spent 17 years practicing law in this very courthouse. He knew the system. He knew the players. He knew exactly which strings to pull and which buttons to push. He walked to the witness stand like a man walking to his coronation, his footsteps echoing in the silent courtroom. Every eye in the room followed him. He knew it, and he loved it. Maggie watched him take the oath, his right hand raised, palm facing outward, his left hand resting on the Bible, fingers spread wide, promising to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The same hand that had texted his mistress while Maggie made him dinner. The same mouth that had told their children Daddy would be home late while he drove to his secret apartment. The same eyes that had looked into hers for 17 years and lied without hesitation. So help him God. Daniel settled into the witness chair, crossing his legs at the ankle, his posture relaxed and open, trustworthy, approachable. He had coached hundreds of clients to sit exactly this way. Now he was performing his own lessons. Knox began his examination with the skill of a surgeon making his first incision. "Mr. Holloway, how long have you been married to Margaret Holloway?" 17 years, Daniel replied. His voice carried just the right note of wistfulness, of a man looking back on happier times. "We met in college, Economics 101. She sat 2 rows ahead of me and always raised her hand first. I thought she was the smartest, most beautiful woman I had ever seen." A collective sigh from some of the women in the gallery. He was good at this. God, he was good. "And when did you notice things beginning to change?" Daniel sighed heavily, the sigh of a long-suffering husband forced to speak difficult truths. "I love Maggie," he said, his voice thick with manufactured emotion. "I want the court to understand that. Everything I'm doing here, every word I speak, is because I love my children and I'm terrified for their safety. This is not about winning or losing. This is about protecting Emma and Lucas from a situation that has become increasingly unstable." Maggie felt her stomach turn. The performance was flawless. Oscar-worthy, even knowing every word was a lie, she almost believed him. "She started changing about 2 years ago," Daniel continued, leaning forward slightly, as if confiding in a friend. "Little things at first, forgetting to pick up the kids from soccer practice, missing Emma's choir concert because she lost track of time, mood swings that seemed to come from nowhere." He paused, looking down at his hands as if gathering himself to continue. "Then the drinking started getting worse. Wine with dinner became wine before dinner. Then wine in the afternoon. I found bottles hidden in the laundry room once, behind the detergent." The gallery murmured. Christine's pen moved furiously across her notepad, documenting every lie. "And the anxiety medication?" Knox prompted softly. "She never told me." Daniel shook his head sadly, the picture of a betrayed spouse. "I found the pill bottle hidden in her sock drawer, behind her winter socks where she thought I wouldn't look. When I asked about it, she became defensive, paranoid, accused me of spying on her, of invading her privacy, as if a husband asking about his wife's health is some kind of crime." The irony was almost beautiful. He was describing his own behavior and projecting it onto her. Every surveillance tactic he had used, every invasion of her privacy, every calculated manipulation, attributed to his victim instead of himself. Classic Daniel, classic abuser. But the gallery was nodding sympathetically. An older woman in the 3rd row was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The court reporter's fingers flew across her machine, recording every word as gospel truth. Maggie sat very still. Her hands were steady now. The shredded tissue had been swept aside, and she would not create more. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her fall apart. Daniel was building his case against her, piece by carefully constructed piece. He had been building it for over a year, documenting wine bottles and photographing recycling bins, cultivating witnesses and rehearsing testimony. But he did not know about the folder on his laptop labeled Exit Strategy, the one dated 14 months ago, the one that contained his entire playbook for destroying her. He did not know she had made copies of everything, and he certainly did not know that in 6 months, while he sat in this very firm building his case against her, she had been quietly building something of her own, something that would bring his entire world crashing down around his ears. The coffee maker beeped 3 times, its familiar signal cutting through the quiet of the evening kitchen. Steam rose from the pot in lazy spirals, carrying the rich scent of hazelnut through the room. Outside the window, March rain streaked the glass in silver ribbons, blurring the streetlights into soft halos of gold. Maggie added pasta to the boiling water, watching the dried macaroni swirl and sink. Macaroni and cheese from scratch, the way her mother had taught her. Lucas's favorite meal, requested every Tuesday night without fail. The recipe had been passed down through 3 generations of women who believed that love was best expressed through butter and sharp cheddar in the simple act of feeding the people you cherished. Emma sat at the kitchen island, her history textbook open to a chapter on the Industrial Revolution. Her pencil tapped in a regular rhythm against the granite countertop, a habit she had inherited from her grandfather. Judge William Reeves had tapped his pen the same way during closing arguments, Maggie remembered, a sign of deep concentration. "Mom, do you know anything about the Industrial Revolution?" "Some." Maggie stirred the pasta, watching the water return to a rolling boil. "What do you need to know? Why did people move to cities if factory work was so terrible? Like they knew the conditions were bad. They knew children were working in mines. Why would anyone choose that?" A good question, a thoughtful question. At 12, Emma was already sharper than most adults Maggie knew. She had her father's quick mind, but her grandfather's moral compass. Thank God for that. "Because sometimes," Maggie said slowly, choosing her words with care, "terrible options look better than the alternatives you're facing." Farm life was brutal too. Back-breaking labor from dawn to dusk, and one bad harvest could mean starvation. At least factories paid cash wages. At least there was the possibility of something better, even if the reality was often worse than the dream. Emma chewed on her pencil, processing this information. Her brow furrowed in concentration, and for a moment she looked exactly like her grandmother in the photographs from the 1970s. The resemblance made Maggie's heart ache. So people chose bad options because they didn't have good ones? Often, yes, and because hope is a powerful thing. People can endure almost anything if they believe tomorrow might be better. Emma nodded slowly and returned to her textbook. Maggie watched her daughter, this fierce girl with her grandmother's cheekbones and her grandfather's stubborn streak. What would she think if she knew what her father was doing? How would she process the truth about the man she idolized? Daniel's phone buzzed on the counter. The sound was jarring in the quiet kitchen. Then it buzzed again. And again. 3 messages in rapid succession. "Dad, your phone," Emma said without looking up from her homework. Daniel was in the shower. He always showered when he got home now. The first thing he did after walking through the door started about 3 months ago. Before that, he would pour himself a drink, loosen his tie, ask about everyone's day. Now he disappeared into the bathroom for 45 minutes, emerging pink and scrubbed and smelling like the expensive body wash he had started buying. A new habit, one of many small changes Maggie had chosen not to examine too closely. The phone buzzed again. 4 messages now. Maggie told herself not to look. She trusted 17 years of marriage meant something. The vows they had exchanged in that little stone church in Vermont, surrounded by friends and family, had to mean something. She trusted him. The phone buzzed a 5th time. She looked. The lock screen displayed previews of the messages, a name she did not recognize. Brittany, no last name, just Brittany with a heart emoji beside it. "Miss you already. Can't wait until Thursday." And then another message appeared as she watched. "Last night was amazing. I keep thinking about the way you..." The preview cut off, mercifully hiding the rest. But Maggie had seen enough. Her vision narrowed, the kitchen shrinking to a pinpoint focused on that glowing screen. The world tilted on its axis. The pasta boiled over. Foam hissed against the hot burner, sizzling and popping. The acrid smell of burning starch filled the air. "Mom?" Emma's voice came from very far away, from another universe where fathers did not betray their families. "Mom, the pasta's boiling over." Maggie grabbed the pot handle without thinking. The metal seared her palm, a bright flash of pain that barely registered through the numbness spreading through her body. She dropped it back onto the stove with a clatter that made Emma jump. "Are you okay?" Her daughter was beside her now, concern creasing her young face. She looked so much like Daniel in that moment, the same worried expression he used to wear when he actually cared about something. "Fine, sweetheart." The words came out steady, almost mechanical. Amazing how the body could perform normalcy while the mind was shattering into 1,000 pieces. "Just tired, long day, you know how it is." Emma studied her mother's face for a long moment, her sharp eyes missing nothing. But she did not push. At 12, she had already learned that adults sometimes needed their privacy, their small lies, their protective silences. "Okay," she said finally. "Let me know if you need help with dinner." She returned to her homework, but Maggie could feel her daughter's attention, a subtle awareness that something was wrong even if the specifics remained hidden. Maggie drained the pasta with shaking hands. She mixed in the butter, watching it melt into golden rivers, added the cream, the flour, the sharp cheddar that Lucas loved. Each motion was mechanical, muscle memory taking over while her conscious mind struggled to process what she had seen. Daniel emerged from the shower wearing his navy bathrobe, the monogrammed one his mother had given him for Christmas. His hair was damp, curling slightly at his temples. He smelled like sandalwood and eucalyptus, the expensive body wash from that boutique on Madison Avenue. He had never shopped at boutiques on Madison Avenue before 3 months ago. "Something smells amazing," he said, crossing to kiss Maggie's cheek. His lips were warm against her skin. "Let me guess, Lucas's famous mac and cheese?" She managed not to flinch, managed to smile, managed to say something appropriate about yes, it was Lucas's favorite. And how was his day? And did he want a glass of wine with dinner? The performance of a lifetime. And she was just getting started. Dinner was a masterpiece of deception. Maggie smiled in the right places, asked about Emma's history project, helped Lucas cut his meat into appropriately sized pieces. She laughed at Daniel's jokes about a difficult client, nodded sympathetically when he complained about a junior associate who could not follow simple instructions. He talked about his day, about some complicated divorce case involving a husband who had hidden assets in offshore accounts. The irony hung in the air, invisible to everyone but Maggie. She wondered if he heard it too, if some part of him recognized the cosmic joke he was living. After dinner, after homework supervision and bedtime stories and goodnight kisses, Maggie found herself standing in the bathroom she shared with her husband. The mirror above the sink reflected a stranger. A woman with dark circles under her eyes and a fake smile frozen on her lips. A woman whose entire life had just imploded without making a sound. She ran the water in the sink, letting the sound cover any noise she might make. Then she retrieved Daniel's phone from where he had left it charging on his nightstand. His password was their anniversary date, the same numbers he had used for everything since they got married. May 15th. He had never been particularly creative. She opened the messages. Brittany, no last name in his contacts. Just Brittany with a heart emoji and 3 pink hearts in a row. The conversation went back 3 months. Maggie scrolled through it with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a wound. Dinner reservations at restaurants Daniel had told her were client meetings. Hotel confirmations for afternoons he had claimed to be in depositions. Photographs that made her stomach lurch. But worse than the pictures, worse than the explicit descriptions of what they had done together, was the casual intimacy of the words. "You know me better than anyone," Daniel had written just last week. "I've never felt this way before. When I'm with you, I feel like I can finally breathe." Never felt this way. After 17 years of marriage. After 2 children and a life built together. After countless nights holding hands across restaurant tables. Countless mornings waking up in the same bed. "Never felt this way. You're the only one who really sees me," he had written 2 weeks ago. "Margaret never understood me. Not really. She only saw what she wanted to see." Margaret. He never called her Margaret. It was always Maggie, Mags, sweetheart, honey. Margaret was what his mother called her, in that dismissive tone that made it clear she considered Maggie beneath her notice. She scrolled further back, found the beginning of the conversation. 3 months and 4 days ago, Brittany Vance. The name finally appeared in a message Daniel had written. Thanks for being so understanding about the situation. I know office relationships can be complicated, but something about you just feels right, office relationship. Brittany worked at his firm. The woman destroying her marriage was someone Daniel saw every single day, someone he mentored and guided and praised in meetings while coming home to play devoted husband and father. Maggie locked the phone, placed it back exactly as she had found it, angled the same way, cord draped in the same pattern. She walked to the bathroom and closed the door as quietly as possible. Then she knelt over the toilet and vomited until there was nothing left. She did not confront him that night. The next morning, she smiled over breakfast, kissed him goodbye at the door, watched his silver Mercedes pull out of the driveway, heading to the office where he built his career on other people's broken marriages while systematically destroying his own. Then she began to investigate. For 2 weeks, she became a detective in her own life. She tracked credit card statements, finding charges at hotels and restaurants Daniel had never mentioned. She discovered a recurring payment of $2,000 a month to an Airbnb on the other side of town. She found receipts for jewelry, a tennis bracelet, a pair of diamond earrings, a gold necklace that had never made it to her jewelry box. She learned everything she could about Brittany Vance. 28 years old, blonde, pretty in a conventional way, paralegal at Mercer and Associates, hired 2 years ago. Daniel had been her mentor, the senior attorney assigned to train her in the intricacies of family law. The pattern was sickening in its predictability. Older married man, younger admiring woman, the intoxicating combination of power and attention, and the thrill of forbidden fruit. Maggie checked Daniel's phone every night while he slept, his breathing deep and regular, his conscience apparently untroubled by the destruction he was causing. She photographed evidence, documented dates and times, built a file that grew thicker by the day. But she did not confront him. She was waiting for something, some sign, some moment of clarity, some voice that would tell her what to do next. The voice came on a Thursday night in late March, when spring was beginning to push through the lingering cold of winter. Daniel had been asleep for an hour, exhausted from whatever he had been doing that day. Maggie slipped out of bed and took his laptop to the kitchen. She knew his computer password too. Emma's birthday. 8 digits that unlocked his entire digital life. The desktop was organized with the precision of a man who spent his career managing information. Work folders with cryptic labels. Personal folders for taxes and investments. A folder of family photos that had not been updated in over a year. And one folder she had never seen before. Exit strategy. Her finger hovered over the trackpad. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she was certain Daniel would hear it upstairs. She opened the folder. Inside were dozens of documents, spreadsheets with financial projections, timelines with milestones and deadlines, legal briefs outlining custody procedures and favorable precedents. And at the very top, a file labeled Custody Strategy, Establishing Maternal Unfitness. The document was dated 14 months ago. 14 months. More than a year before she found the text. More than a year before she even suspected anything was wrong. She opened the document. The first page was a checklist, formatted with Daniel's characteristic precision. Establishing maternal unfitness. Action items. Document instances of forgotten appointments. Photograph evidence of alcohol consumption. Note any prescriptions obtained without spousal knowledge. Cultivate witnesses among neighbors and family friends. Research psychiatric medications and their side effects. Establish pattern of emotional instability. The list went on, page after page. A systematic dismantling of her character, assembled with the same meticulous attention Daniel brought to his most important cases. He had been building a case against her while she made his coffee, while she organized his mother's birthday party, while she lay next to him every night, believing she was loved, believing she was safe. The worst part was the dates. 14 months of planning. He had known for 14 months that he was going to destroy her. And he had kissed her goodnight every single evening, had made love to her, had laughed at her jokes, and held her when she cried about her father's death, all while preparing to take her children away. Maggie closed the laptop. Her hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped, replaced by something colder, something harder. She checked her phone. Lock screen, unlock, lock, unlock, lock, unlock. Looking at the screenshots she had taken of his messages, reading them over and over as if they might say something different this time. They did not change. They never would. I am not imagining this, she thought, the words crystallizing in her mind like ice forming on a winter pond. The signs were all there. I just did not want to see them. The clock on the microwave read 2:47 in the morning. 3 hours until dawn. 3 hours to decide what came next. She poured herself a glass of water from the filtered pitcher in the refrigerator, sat at the kitchen table in the dark, listening to the rain against the windows and the old house settling around her. 14 months. He had been playing her for 14 months, setting traps, documenting failures, building a case that would destroy her in court. But now she knew the game, and Maggie Holloway had never been very good at losing. Christine Palmer's apartment smelled like old books and coffee that had been reheated at least 3 times. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined every wall, stuffed with legal texts and case files, and the occasional novel that Christine never had time to read. A tabby cat named Objection watched from his perch on the windowsill, his amber eyes tracking Maggie's pacing with feline indifference. It was 2 in the morning, and both women sat at Christine's kitchen table, surrounded by legal pads, highlighters, and the accumulated evidence of Maggie's devastated marriage. The overhead light flickered occasionally, a reminder that Christine's building was as old as it was charming. "Tell me everything," Christine said. She was still wearing the oversized MIT law sweatshirt she had answered the door in, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun that had probably started the day as something more professional. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she had been working late before Maggie's panicked phone call interrupted her night. Maggie told her everything. The text she had found 3 weeks ago, the photographs she had been quietly collecting ever since, the folder on Daniel's laptop labeled Exit Strategy, the 14-month plan to take her children. Her voice remained steady throughout, the words coming out in a flat recitation of facts. She had cried herself empty during those first terrible nights. Now there was only the cold clarity of someone who had accepted the truth and was ready to fight. Christine listened without interrupting, her sharp legal mind absorbing every detail. When Maggie finished, she sat back in her chair and exhaled slowly, her breath whistling through her teeth. "That son of a bitch." "I know." "No, Maggie, you don't know. This is worse than you think." Christine pulled one of the printouts closer, the one showing Daniel's timeline for the custody strategy. "He's been building this case for over a year. Every judge in family court knows him. He's played golf with half of them. The other half owe him favors for referrals and professional courtesies." Maggie's stomach clenched. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying he's stacked the deck. In a normal divorce, you would be fine. More than fine. You're a great mother. Everyone who knows you would testify to that in a heartbeat." Christine's voice hardened, her courtroom edge showing through the late-night exhaustion. "But this isn't a normal divorce. This is Daniel Holloway going scorched earth, using every weapon in his arsenal. And his arsenal is significant." The coffee maker gurgled in the corner, brewing another pot that neither woman would drink. The tabby cat stretched and yawned, unimpressed by the human drama unfolding in his territory. "What do I do?" Maggie asked. The question felt small, helpless. She hated feeling helpless. "We fight." Christine's brown eyes were fierce, the same look she had worn when they pulled all-nighters together in law school, preparing for exams that would determine their futures. "But we need ammunition, serious ammunition. What do you have?" Maggie pulled out her phone, showed Christine the screenshots of Daniel's texts with Brittany, the credit card statements documenting secret hotel rooms and unreported dinners, the Airbnb receipts for an apartment she had never known existed. Christine nodded slowly, scrolling through the images. "It's a start. It proves the affair, which gives us grounds. But we need more than that. He's claiming you're an unfit mother. We need to prove he's an unfit father, an unfit husband, and an unfit human being." "How?" "Follow the money." Christine tapped the credit card statement displayed on the phone screen. "These hotels, these dinners, this apartment for his mistress. How is he paying for all of this? His salary at the firm is good, but it's not that good. Partners at Mercer and Associates make around $300,000 a year. This level of spending doesn't add up. Maggie had not thought about that. She had been so focused on the affair itself, on the betrayal and the photographs and the sickening reality of her husband in another woman's arms, that she had not considered the logistics of funding his double life. I don't know, she admitted. Daniel handles all the finances. He has since we got married. He said it was easier that way, that he understood investments and I should focus on the house and the kids. Christine's expression darkened. Of course he did. Classic financial abuse. Keep the wife in the dark so she doesn't know what she's owed when everything falls apart, so she can't defend herself when the time comes. Financial abuse. The phrase echoed in Maggie's mind. She had heard it before in the context of Daniel's cases. Women who came into his office having no idea how much money their husbands made, how much they owned together, where the assets were hidden. Daniel had always spoken of them with a mixture of pity and contempt. She never imagined she would become one of them. What about your father's estate? Christine asked suddenly. When William died, he left you everything. That's been, what, 3 years now? Maggie nodded, the familiar ache of grief stirring beneath the fresher wounds of betrayal. Her father, Judge William Reeves, had passed away 3 years ago on a beautiful October afternoon. A heart attack on the golf course, the doctor said. There one moment, gone the next. His playing partners had thought he was joking when he clutched his chest and fell. By the time they realized the truth, it was too late. The money's in a trust, Maggie explained. Daniel set it up right after Dad died. He said the firm he recommended would manage it until we needed it for the kids' college or retirement or whatever. He handles all the statements and communications with them. How much money are we talking about? Daniel said after taxes and estate fees, it came to just under $300,000. Dad wasn't wealthy, you know. Public servants don't exactly get rich. But he was careful with his money, and the house was paid off. Christine went very still. Her coffee cup hovered halfway to her lips, frozen in midair. Maggie, she said slowly, each word weighted with significance. Your father was a judge for 35 years. He owned his house in Westchester outright, no mortgage. He had a state pension, an IRA, and he once told me he had been investing in index funds since before you were born. Daniel said a lot of it went to taxes. Estate planning wasn't done properly, so there were penalties. Christine set down her coffee cup with a sharp click. Your father came to my bar exam celebration. You remember? He gave me a card with $1,000 in it because he knew I couldn't afford my bar review course fees. He told me that day, Maggie, he told me specifically that he had set aside money for you, a significant amount. He wanted you to be secure no matter what happened in your life. The kitchen seemed to shrink around them. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead like an angry wasp, loud in the sudden silence. How significant? Maggie heard herself ask. He mentioned millions, plural. He was proud of it, proud that he could leave you and the grandchildren provided for. He said it was the one thing he could do to protect you when he was gone. Millions, the word did not compute. It did not match the $300,000 Daniel had shown her in the trust statements. That's not possible, Maggie whispered. Daniel showed me the paperwork. The trust balance was just under $300,000 after all the fees and transfers. From a firm Daniel recommended? Maggie's stomach dropped. She knew suddenly with terrible certainty what Christine was about to say. I need to call that firm tomorrow, she said, reaching for her phone. I need to see the statements myself. Christine grabbed her arm before she could dial. Don't tip him off. If I'm right about what's happening here, the moment you start asking questions, Daniel will know someone is looking. He'll move everything he can reach. So what do I do? Just sit here and wonder if my husband stole my father's money? You let a professional look into it first. Someone who knows how to follow money trails without leaving footprints. Graham Fletcher's name entered Maggie's life for the first time that night. A forensic accountant with a reputation for finding assets that powerful people wanted to stay hidden. Christine had used him on 3 difficult cases. He had never failed to find something. He's expensive, Christine warned me. $15,000 retainer, minimum, more if the trail gets complicated. $15,000, money Maggie did not have access to because Daniel controlled everything, because she had trusted him with their finances the way she had trusted him with her heart. I have some jewelry, she said, her mind racing through options. Things my mother gave me before she passed. I could sell them. Christine shook her head firmly. Keep the jewelry. Your mother would haunt both of us if you sold her wedding ring to fund this investigation. Then how? I'll cover Graham's retainer. Chris, I can't let you. You can pay me back when this is over. Consider it an investment in justice. Christine's voice left no room for argument. I've wanted to take Daniel Holloway down for years. He made a junior partner cry at a bar association dinner once. Told her she wasn't pretty enough to win jury trials. In front of 50 people, she left the profession 6 months later. Despite everything, despite the shattered ruins of her marriage and the terror of what was coming, Maggie almost smiled. That sounds like him. Then let's nail the bastard to the wall. The coffee maker clicked off. Having finished brewing a pot neither woman would drink. The cat yawned again and began to groom himself. Outside the window, the first gray light of dawn was beginning to touch the skyline. A new day, a new beginning. The first step in a war Maggie had not known she was fighting until it was almost too late. She drove home as the sun rose over the city, painting the buildings in shades of gold and pink. Daniel's car was still in the driveway. He would be waking soon, expecting coffee and breakfast and the same performance they had been maintaining for weeks. She pulled into the garage and sat in her car for a long moment. The engine ticked as it cooled. A dog barked somewhere in the neighborhood, greeting the new day. She thought about her children sleeping upstairs, Emma with her history book on the nightstand, Lucas with his stuffed elephant tucked under his arm. She thought about the woman Daniel had turned her into, the detective, the spy, the wife waiting for the right moment to strike. She thought about her father's voice on her wedding day, the hesitation in his step as he walked her down the aisle, the way his hand had tightened on hers just before he gave her away. You sure about this, Magpie? Something about that boy's eyes. She should have listened, but she had not listened then. So she would act now. Maggie got out of the car, walked into her house, made coffee for the man who was trying to destroy her, and waited for Christine's forensic accountant to uncover the truth. 3 weeks later, Graham Fletcher sat across from Maggie in Christine's cramped office. He was a thin man in his early 50s with wire-rimmed glasses that kept sliding down his nose and the demeanor of someone who found genuine pleasure in spreadsheets. His briefcase was battered leather, stuffed with documents that rustled when he moved. He placed a manila folder on the desk between them. It was thick, at least 2 inches of paper held together with a heavy binder clip. Your husband has been busy, he said, adjusting his glasses. Shall I start with the offshore accounts or the shell companies? Maggie's mouth went dry. What? Graham opened the folder with the practiced ease of a magician revealing his best trick. Inside were bank statements, corporate filings, wire transfer records. A paper trail that stretched across multiple pages, dense with numbers and legal jargon. Your father left you $4.7 million, Graham said. His voice was calm, almost clinical. Not 300,000, 4.7 million. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. Maggie stared at it, her brain refusing to process the information. That's not possible, she heard herself say. Daniel showed me the trust statements. I saw the balance. It was just under 300,000 after taxes and fees. He showed you statements from a firm that doesn't exist. Graham pulled out a sheet of paper covered in tiny text. Ridgewood Asset Management. Impressive letterhead. Very professional looking. The address listed as a mailbox store in Wilmington, Delaware. The phone number routes to an answering service in Manila. The firm itself has no registration, no license, no record with any financial regulatory authority. Christine leaned forward from her chair in the corner. Daniel created a fake asset management company. He created several. Graham's voice remained matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing minor accounting irregularities rather than systematic fraud on a massive scale. Over the past 3 years, he's moved the money through a series of transfers designed to look legitimate. Service fees of between $5,000 and $15,000 monthly. Management charges that escalated over time. Investment losses that were conveniently never documented. Where did the money go? Maggie asked. Her voice sounded far away, like someone else was speaking. Graham turned to the next page, a spreadsheet with highlighted entries, each line a piece of evidence in the case against her husband. Let me walk you through it chronologically. Approximately 18 months ago, a wire transfer of $150,000 went to something called Madison Property Holdings, LLC. That entity used the funds to make a down payment on a condominium in the city. The deed is in Daniel's name. The apartment, Brittany's apartment, the place where her husband conducted his affair, paid for with money her father had left her. There's more, Grickham continued, flipping to another page. Monthly payments of $4,000 to the same property for what appears to be furniture, fixtures, and upkeep. Jewelry purchases totaling approximately $35,000 over the past year. Restaurant bills, hotel charges, travel expenses, all funded through a credit card linked to one of the shell companies. Maggie thought about the diamond earrings she had found in Daniel's briefcase 3 weeks ago, hidden in a velvet pouch she was never supposed to discover. She had assumed they were a gift for her, perhaps an anniversary surprise. Now she understood they had never been meant for her at all. The biggest single expenditure, however, was professional. Graham removed his glasses and cleaned them carefully on his tie, a gesture that seemed to give him pleasure. His partnership buy-in at Mercer and Associates. The firm requires incoming partners to invest $200,000 as a condition of their promotion. Your husband made that payment 3 years ago, approximately 6 months after your father's death. 3 years ago, but Daniel wasn't made partner until 18 months ago. Exactly. He made the payment early, used it as leverage to fast-track his promotion. He told the managing partners the funds came from family investments and a small inheritance. Graham's smile was thin. Technically accurate, I suppose. Just not his family, not his inheritance. Maggie's father had paid for Daniel's partnership. Her father's life savings, earned over 35 years of public service, accumulated through decades of careful investing and frugal living, had funded Daniel's career advancement at the firm, where he now spent his days planning to take custody of her children. The irony was so perfect, it was almost beautiful. Almost. She remembered her father at their wedding nearly 18 years ago now. The hesitation in his step as they waited at the back of the church. The way his hand had tightened on hers just before they began the walk down the aisle. Something about that boy's eyes, he had said. There's something behind them that doesn't match the smile. She had dismissed it as paternal anxiety. All fathers were suspicious of the men who wanted to marry their daughters. It was practically a cliché. But her father had seen the truth, had sensed it somehow, with the instincts of a man who had spent his life judging character from the bench, and she had been too blinded by love, or what she thought was love, to listen. There's one more thing, Graham said. He pulled out another document, this one dense with legal language. The firm extended your husband an additional loan approximately 8 months ago, $400,000, secured against his partnership stake. For what? The paperwork says home improvements, renovations to your residence. Graham raised an eyebrow. Have you had any work done on your house in the past 8 months? Maggie thought about their home, the same paint that had been there for years, the kitchen that Daniel kept promising to update but never did, the bathroom fixtures she had been asking to replace since Lucas was born. Nothing, she said, not a single thing. I couldn't find any record of contractors, permits, or material purchases either, which leads me to conclude the money went somewhere else entirely. Christine spoke up from her corner. Cash withdrawals? Most likely, possibly a safety deposit box or multiple boxes. Whatever he's planning for the future, he wants liquid assets available that can't be easily traced. $400,000. Hidden somewhere, a war chest for whatever came next. Maggie sat very still, processing the full scale of the betrayal. This was not just an affair. This was not just a bad husband looking for excitement outside his marriage. This was a criminal enterprise conducted over years, with her and her children as the victims. Can we prove all of this in court? She asked finally. With time, yes. The documentation is thorough. He covered his tracks well, but not well enough for someone who knows where to look. Graham closed the folder and folded his hands on top of it. However, the moment you file for divorce or indicate that you know about any of this, He will know someone has been investigating. He'll move everything he can reach, liquidate what he can liquidate, and disappear what he can't. So we need to act before he knows we're coming. That would be my recommendation. Christine and Graham exchanged a look. Something passed between them, a shared idea that made Christine's eyes light up in a way Maggie had not seen since law school. I have a thought, Christine said slowly. It's unconventional, possibly crazy, definitely the most satisfying thing I've ever contemplated. Tell me. Mercer and Associates has been looking for a silent investor for almost 2 years now. The managing partner, Richard Mercer, has what the legal community politely calls financial difficulties. What he actually has is a gambling addiction that's cost him close to $1 million in the past 3 years. The firm is hemorrhaging money despite appearances. Maggie stared at her friend. You want me to buy the law firm where my husband works? I want you to buy the firm your husband stole from you to work for. There's a subtle but important distinction. Christine's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Think about it. Every email he sends from his work account would be company property. Every document he creates on company computers. Every strategy session for your custody case, conducted in conference rooms you would own. The idea was absurd. The kind of revenge fantasy that only existed in movies and novels. The sort of thing people dreamed about but never actually did. And yet, how would that even work? Maggie heard herself asking. You would need an intermediary, an investment group that could approach Mercer without your name attached anywhere. Graham has contacts who specialize in exactly this kind of arrangement. Christine leaned forward, her enthusiasm building. It would require a significant portion of your remaining funds. After Daniel's theft, you have approximately $1.2 million in actual liquid assets. That should be enough for a controlling stake if Mercer is desperate enough. And from what Graham has found, he's desperate. And if it doesn't work, then you've lost almost everything on a gamble. Christine's voice was honest, brutal in its clarity. But Maggie, if it does work, you will own him. Everything he does at that firm will be on your dime. Every computer, every phone, every square foot of office space, including whatever evidence he's building against you in your custody case. Own him. The words resonated in a place Maggie had not known existed until 3 weeks ago, when she found the folder labeled Exit Strategy on her husband's laptop. He'll find out eventually, she said, thinking through the implications. When the divorce goes public, when people start asking questions, someone will connect the dots. Eventually, yes, but by then you'll have access to everything. Every document he has ever created at that firm. Every communication with his attorney, every witness he's coached, and every lie he's told. Christine's eyes gleamed. By the time he figures out what's happened, it will be far too late. Maggie thought about the folder on Daniel's laptop. 14 months of planning. Photographs of wine bottles she had drunk while sobbing alone in her bathroom. Documentation of every minor failure she had committed as a mother. A systematic campaign to paint her as unfit to raise her own children. All of it created on company computers, company networks, company time. If she owned the company, she owned the evidence. Do it, she said. The words came out strong, certain. Whatever it takes, whatever it was, do it, Hebbe. Christine's smile widened. It was not a pleasant expression. I was hoping you would say that. Summer settled over the city like a humid blanket, thick and oppressive. The kind of heat that made the air shimmer over hot pavement and turned the inside of parked cars into ovens. Maggie moved through her days with the precision of a surgeon, every action calculated, every word measured. Every morning, she made Daniel's coffee exactly the way he liked it. 2 sugars, splash of cream, served in the Yale Law mug his mother had given him when he graduated, the one with the chip on the rim that Maggie had always wanted to throw away but never did. She kissed him goodbye at the door, watched him drive to work in his silver Mercedes, heading to the office that now belonged to her without his knowledge. Every evening, she welcomed him home with dinner on the table and children bathed and homework completed. She asked about his day, listened as he complained about difficult clients, unreasonable judges, junior associates who could not follow simple instructions. She nodded in all the right places, made sympathetic noises at appropriate moments, laughed at his jokes even when they were not funny. The performance required every ounce of energy she possessed. By the time she fell into bed each night, she was exhausted in a way that sleep could not repair. But she kept going because the alternative was unthinkable. The purchase of Mercer and Associates had been completed in late May, 3 weeks after her conversation with Christine and Graham. The deal went through layers of shell companies and intermediary investors, names that had no connection to Margaret Holloway except in documents locked away in Graham's secure files. Richard Mercer had been pathetically grateful. His gambling debts had reached critical mass, and the mysterious investment group offering to purchase 45% of his firm had seemed like divine intervention. He never questioned where the money came from or why the investors wanted to remain anonymous. He was too busy breathing sighs of relief. Daniel attended the announcement party, held in the firm's glass-walled conference room with views of the city skyline. He shook hands with the representatives of the investment group, men Christine had hired specifically for their ability to play a role convincingly. He toasted the firm's bright future with champagne that Maggie had technically paid for. She watched from a coffee shop across the street, sipping a latte and pretending to read a book, while Daniel celebrated his unwitting defeat. Now, 3 months later, she had access to everything. Daniel's work emails arrived in a secure folder on Christine's computer every night, automatically forwarded by the IT systems Maggie technically owned. His calendar showed meetings he never mentioned at home. His billing records revealed long lunches and early departures that had nothing to do with legitimate work. But most importantly, she had access to his case files, including the custody case he was building against his own wife. She read every document during the quiet hours after midnight, when Daniel was asleep and the house was silent. Strategy memos discussing how to present evidence of her supposed instability. Research notes on judges who were sympathetic to fathers in custody disputes. Draft affidavits from witnesses she now knew had been carefully coached. It was like reading her own autopsy report. Clinical, detailed, devastating in its thoroughness. He had been documenting her for 14 months. The wine bottles photographed every Tuesday morning by Dorothy Chen. The anxiety medication, obtained through a doctor Daniel himself had recommended. A psychologist he had consulted about red flags in maternal behavior, asking what symptoms to look for and how to document them convincingly. He had even made notes about Emma. Possible parental alienation. Child showing signs of loyalty, conflict with father. Recommends psychological evaluation to establish mother's influence on child's perception. Her daughter. Her fierce, brilliant, protective daughter. Reduced to a bullet point in Daniel's strategy for destroying her mother. The rage that filled Maggie was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was hot and cold at once, fire and ice battling for dominance in her chest. A consuming fury that threatened to overwhelm her if she let it. She channeled it into planning. July arrived with record-breaking temperatures. The heat wave made national news, and Maggie spent hours at the community pool with Emma and Lucas, watching them splash and laugh, while she plotted her husband's destruction behind sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat. On July 7th, Daniel filed for divorce. He presented it to her after dinner that night, the children conveniently at his mother's house. He had arranged everything, set the scene for maximum impact. Candles on the table, her favorite wine, soft music in the background. "I think we need to talk," he said, his voice carrying exactly the right note of reluctant sadness. "About us, about our future." "I'm listening." "Maggie, this isn't working. We both know it. We have been going through the motions for years, pretending everything is fine when it isn't." He reached for her hand across the table. She let him take it, forced herself not to recoil at his touch. "I want what's best for everyone, especially the kids." His voice was perfect, reasonable, sad but resolute. A husband who had struggled and finally accepted the inevitable. "I've talked to a lawyer," he continued, "just to understand our options. I'm not trying to be adversarial here. I want us to work together to find a solution that works for everyone. What do you have in mind?" Daniel outlined his proposal with the smooth confidence of a man who had been planning this moment for over a year. Primary custody of Emma and Lucas to him, with liberal visitation for Maggie on alternate weekends and holidays. An equitable division of assets based on what he claimed to know about their finances. The house sold and proceeds split evenly. He never mentioned the $4.7 million he had stolen. Never mentioned the shell companies or the fraudulent trust statements. Never mentioned Brittany or the apartment or the $35,000 in jewelry. He was lying to her face, presenting a reasonable proposal while planning to leave her with nothing. "I appreciate your honesty," she said, her voice steady. "Can I have some time to think about this?" Daniel's smile was like watching a snake uncoil. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I just want us to handle this like adults." That night, after Daniel fell asleep, Maggie stood in the shower for 45 minutes. The water went from hot to warm to tepid to cold. She barely noticed. The rage burning in her chest had its own heat. He thought he was winning. He thought she would crumble, would agree to his terms, would walk away with nothing because she did not know what he had taken. He had no idea who he was dealing with anymore. The divorce filing hit the court system 3 days later. Daniel asked for primary custody, citing Maggie's erratic behavior and declining mental health. He submitted the photographs, the affidavits, 14 months of carefully constructed lies. His strategy was flawless. His execution was perfect. And he had no idea that Maggie had copies of everything he had ever written, every email he had ever sent, every document he had ever created on the computers she now owned. She let him think he was winning. She showed up to preliminary hearings looking confused, overwhelmed, exactly the way his case file predicted she would look. She fumbled with papers, asked her attorney to repeat questions, played the role of the anxious wife struggling to keep up with her brilliant husband's legal maneuvering. Daniel watched with barely concealed satisfaction. His mother beamed from the gallery. Knox smiled his shark smile and predicted a quick resolution. They had no idea. The judge assigned to their case was Evelyn Ashford, a sharp-eyed woman who had been William Reeves' law clerk 30 years ago, when Maggie's father was just starting his judicial career. A woman who still exchanged Christmas cards with Maggie every year, who had sent flowers to William's funeral and a handwritten note about what a privilege it had been to learn from him. The assignment had not been random. Christine had made sure of that, and Daniel had no idea. It was August now. The custody hearing was scheduled for September 15th. 4 weeks to prepare, 4 weeks to decide exactly how completely she wanted to destroy him. Maggie sat in her parked car outside the courthouse after filing her response to Daniel's petition. The afternoon sun turned the windshield into a blazing rectangle of light, almost too bright to bear. She had been sitting here for 20 minutes, unable to make herself drive home. Her hands would not stop shaking. She had spent months preparing for this moment, buying the firm, gathering evidence, building her case piece by meticulous piece. She had done everything right, anticipated every move, countered every strategy. But now that it was real, now that the court date was set and the battle lines drawn, she felt something she had not expected. Fear, not of losing. She had done the work. She had the evidence. She would not lose. The fear was of what came after, of the person she was becoming, of the cold, calculating machine she had turned herself into over the past 6 months. She had always been kind, patient, the woman who made peace at family dinners and smoothed over arguments at school events. The woman Daniel had married precisely because she would not fight back. That woman was gone. In her place was someone harder, sharper, more dangerous. Someone who could smile at her husband over breakfast while planning his complete destruction. Someone who could perform love while feeling only contempt. Was this who she wanted to be? The question did not have an easy answer. She thought about Emma, about Lucas, about what they would think when they were old enough to understand what had happened. Would they see her as a hero who fought for them, or a villain who destroyed their father? Both, probably, depending on the day. After 30 minutes, Maggie's hand steadied. She started the car, drove home to make dinner for the man who was trying to take her children. The performance continued, but underneath the surface, the countdown had begun. The custody hearing began on a Tuesday morning in mid-September. Indian summer had settled over the city, one last blast of warmth before autumn arrived to strip the trees bare. The courtroom was stifling, despite the ancient air conditioning unit rattling in the corner, and everyone in the gallery fanned themselves with programs and folded papers. Maggie wore a navy blue dress, modest and conservative, maternal without being dowdy, the kind of outfit Daniel's strategy documents said would make her appear appropriate but not threatening to male judicial authority. She had read that particular memo so many times she could quote it from memory. It had been illuminating, seeing herself through her husband's eyes. A problem to be managed, an obstacle to be overcome, a woman to be destroyed with clinical precision. Daniel wore his best charcoal suit, the Italian one that cost $3,000. He sat at the plaintiff's table with Theodore Knox, shuffling papers and murmuring strategy. His mother perched behind him in the gallery, her face arranged in an expression of dignified concern. Her cream Chanel suit probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. Judge Evelyn Ashford entered through a door behind the bench. The bailiff called the court to order, his voice echoing in the silent chamber. All rise. The Superior Court of Westchester County is now in session, the Honorable Evelyn Ashford presiding. Everyone stood. The machinery of justice creaked into motion. Knox opened with his carefully constructed narrative, the same story Maggie had been hearing for months. The concerned husband, the struggling wife, the children caught in the middle, desperately needing the stability only their father could provide. The wine bottles, the medication, the neighbor who had seen her stumbling, the pattern of deterioration, documented with photographs and affidavits, and the testimony of carefully coached witnesses. Maggie sat very still and let them talk. Christine's hand found her wrist under the table, that familiar reassuring pressure. We planned for this. Stay calm. The first day was brutal. Daniel testified with practiced sincerity, his voice catching at all the right moments. His mother corroborated his concerns with the precision of someone who had rehearsed her lines until they felt like truth. Maggie watched and listened and said nothing. She let them build their case, brick by careful brick, knowing that she held the demolition charges that would bring the whole structure crashing down. That night, she could not sleep. 3 in the morning found her in the kitchen, standing in the dark with only the light from the microwave display for company. The house was silent, the children at their grandparents' houses as required by the temporary custody arrangement. She had never realized how much she relied on their presence, their noise, their needs that gave her days structure and purpose. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Emma. Mom, are you okay? Dad's mom keeps saying weird things about you. Maggie's heart clenched, her 12-year-old daughter caught in a war zone trying to make sense of adult cruelty. She typed back carefully. I'm okay, sweetheart. I love you. Everything is going to be okay. She did not know if she believed it. The second day of hearings began with Knox calling additional witnesses. Dorothy Chen took the stand, testifying about the morning she had seen Maggie stumbling to her car. Her account was detailed and convincing, full of specific observations that painted a picture of a woman coming apart at the seams. Maggie knew the truth, the twisted ankle, the ice, the perfectly innocent explanation for what Dorothy had chosen to interpret as evidence of alcoholism. But knowing the truth and proving it were different things. A colleague of Daniel's testified next, Jeffrey Warren, a partner at the firm who had worked with Daniel for 15 years. He described Maggie's behavior at firm events over the past year. Increasingly withdrawn, distracted, short-tempered, with wait staff at a charity gala. The lies accumulated like layers of sediment, each one small enough to dismiss individually. Together they formed a picture of a woman losing control. Then Christine stood. Your Honor, the defense calls Dr. Catherine Wells. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Daniel's head snapped around, his mask of composure slipping for just a moment. Dr. Wells was a small woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair pulled back in a simple bun. She had been Maggie's therapist for 5 months now, since those first terrible weeks after discovering Daniel's betrayal. Her voice was calm and professional as she took the oath. Knox was on his feet immediately. Objection, Your Honor. Therapist-patient privilege. Daniel spoke up from the plaintiff's table. Your Honor, I don't think... He stopped, corrected himself. I mean, the privilege should apply here. Judge Ashford's expression was unreadable. The privilege belongs to the patient, Mr. Holloway, and she has chosen to waive it. Overruled. Dr. Wells took the stand. Christine began her examination with careful, precise questions, laying a foundation for what was to come. Dr. Wells, how long have you been treating Mrs. Holloway? Approximately 5 months. She came to me in early April of this year. And what was the nature of her initial complaint? She was experiencing severe anxiety and depression following a significant trauma. The discovery of her husband's infidelity, combined with evidence that he had been planning to seek custody of their children and systematically documenting false evidence against her. The gallery stirred. Knox opened his mouth to object, then seemed to think better of it. In your professional opinion, Derwells, what is Mrs. Holloway's mental state? Mrs. Holloway is not mentally unstable. She is not suffering from any condition that would impair her ability to parent her children effectively. Dr. Wells turned to look directly at Daniel. What she has been experiencing is a normal and appropriate response to systematic psychological abuse. Could you explain what you mean by that term? Gaslighting, that's the common term. A pattern of manipulation designed to make the victim question their own perceptions, their own sanity, their own reality. Dr. Wells folded her hands in her lap. In Mrs. Holloway's case, her husband spent over a year documenting minor incidents and presenting them as evidence of serious problems, making her feel that she was failing as a mother when she was, in fact, performing admirably under extremely difficult circumstances. Knox finally found his voice. Objection. The witness is speculating about my client's intentions. I'm not speculating, Dr. Wells replied calmly. I'm drawing conclusions from documented evidence that Mrs. Holloway provided during our sessions. Emails, text messages, and internal documents from Mr. Holloway's work files that detail his strategy in explicit terms. The courtroom went very still. Daniel's face had gone white. Your Honor, Knox said, his voice sharp, this is highly prejudicial. The defense is introducing evidence that has not been properly disclosed. The evidence was included in our supplemental filing 3 days ago, Christine said. Perhaps Mr. Knox failed to read his mail. A ripple of laughter from the gallery. Judge Ashford silenced it with a look. I'll allow the testimony to continue, she said. Mr. Knox, you'll have the opportunity to cross-examine. Dr. Wells continued her testimony, painting a picture of a woman who had been systematically undermined by the person who should have been her greatest support, a mother who had continued to put her children first even while her world collapsed around her, a survivor of emotional abuse who had found the strength to fight back. By the time she finished, several women in the gallery were dabbing at their eyes. Knox's cross-examination was brief and ineffective, unable to shake Derwells from her conclusions. Daniel's face remained pale throughout. For the first time since the hearing began, Maggie saw fear in his eyes. Good. The court recessed for lunch. Maggie sat in a bathroom stall for 15 minutes, breathing through the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. The performance was working. Christine's strategy was showing results. But the cost was becoming visible. Every accusation Daniel had made was now public record. Every lie preserved in court transcripts for anyone to read. Their children would see this someday, would know exactly what their father had done, what their mother had done in response. Was justice worth that price? The afternoon session brought more defense witnesses, character references who testified to Maggie's devotion to her children, Emma's teacher who described a mother deeply involved in her daughter's education, Lucas's soccer coach who spoke about Maggie's presence at every game, every practice, every team event. The counter-narrative took shape, brick by careful brick, but the real damage had been done in the morning. Dr. Wells's testimony hung over the courtroom like smoke, impossible to ignore. That night, Maggie stood alone in her kitchen at 3 in the morning. She opened a bottle of wine, looked at it for a long moment, thought about how it would look if someone photographed this scene, another exhibit in Daniel's case against her. She poured the wine down the drain and watched it swirl into the garbage disposal. She baked instead. Her mother's chocolate chip cookies, the recipe memorized since childhood. Measuring, mixing. The familiar motion steadied her shaking hands. The kitchen filled with the smell of butter and sugar, warmth against the cold emptiness of the house. A sound at the back door made her jump. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she crossed to see who could possibly be there at this hour. Emma stood on the porch, a backpack slung over one shoulder. Sweetheart? Maggie pulled her inside immediately. What are you doing here? You're supposed to be at your grandmother's. Emma set down her backpack. Her jaw was set in that stubborn line Maggie recognized from her own reflection. I told Dad I needed my history book. It was the only excuse he'd believe. She should send her back. The custody agreement was clear. The judge would not be pleased if she learned that Maggie was violating the terms. Instead, she opened her arms. Emma walked into them without hesitation. For a long moment, mother and daughter stood in the warm kitchen, holding each other against the darkness. They baked cookies together until the first gray light of dawn began to touch the windows. Neither mentioned the courtroom. Neither mentioned tomorrow. They just existed together in a bubble of butter and chocolate and unconditional love. "Mom?" Emma said finally as the last batch cooled on the counter. "Yes, sweetheart? I know what Dad is. I've known for a while." Maggie's throat tightened. She had tried so hard to protect them, to keep the ugliness away from their innocent eyes. But children see everything. They always do. "How much do you know?" she asked quietly. "Enough." Emma's voice was older than her 12 years. "I found some texts on his phone months ago. I wanted to tell you, but I didn't know how. I didn't know if you already knew or if it would just make things worse." The tears came then. The tears Maggie had been holding for months, fighting to keep contained behind her careful mask. Emma held her, stroking her hair, murmuring comfort. "It's going to be okay, Mom," she whispered. "I promise. It's going to be okay." The roles had reversed, the child becoming the parent, the mother finding strength in her daughter's arms. "Emma," Maggie said, pulling back to look into her daughter's eyes, "I need you to know something. Whatever happens in that courtroom, I will never stop fighting for you and your brother. Do you understand?" Emma nodded. Her eyes were fierce, determined. "I know, Mom." "Good." They finished the cookies as the sun rose. Mother and daughter, survivors both. Just before Emma left to return to her grandmother's house, she spoke again. "Mom, I want to talk to the judge. I want to tell her what it's really like." Maggie's heart broke and mended in the same moment. "We'll talk to Christine," she said, "tomorrow." Emma's smile was the first genuine one Maggie had seen from her in months. Hope, fragile and precious, and worth protecting at any cost. The coffee shop was tucked away in a small town 40 minutes from the city. It was the kind of place that catered to locals rather than tourists, with mismatched furniture and artwork from local high school students on the walls. The coffee was excellent, and more importantly, no one here would recognize the wife of a prominent Westchester attorney. Maggie arrived first, choosing a table in the back corner where she could watch the entrance. The text message had come yesterday from a number she recognized despite never having saved it. "I need to talk to you about Daniel. Please, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I have information you need. Brittany Vance." Christine had advised strongly against this meeting. Too risky, too unpredictable. The woman could be setting a trap, gathering intelligence for Daniel's case. But Maggie had spent 6 months learning to trust her instincts, and something in the desperation of that message felt genuine. Besides, she wanted to look into the eyes of the woman who had helped destroy her marriage. Wanted to understand what Brittany had seen in Daniel that made her willing to be the other woman. The door opened at exactly 2 o'clock. Brittany entered hesitantly, scanning the room until she spotted Maggie in the corner. She was younger than Maggie had expected from the photographs, despite knowing exactly how old she was. 28, but looking barely 25. Blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Minimal makeup. The kind of pretty that photographed well, but looked vulnerable in person. She was also visibly pregnant. The curve of her belly was unmistakable under her loose sweater. Maggie had not expected that. Brittany crossed the room with the reluctant steps of someone walking to their own execution. She stopped at Maggie's table, her hands twisting together nervously. "Thank you for coming," she said. Her voice trembled slightly. "I wasn't sure you would." "Sit down." Brittany sat. She folded her hands around the coffee cup the waitress brought without asking, her knuckles white with tension. "I don't know where to start," she admitted. "Start with why you're here." A long silence. Brittany stared into her coffee as if it contained the answers to questions she had not yet asked. "He told me you were crazy," she finally said. "That you threatened him, that you were violent with the kids, that you hit them when he wasn't home. He said you had mental problems, that you refused to get treated. And you believed him." "I wanted to." Brittany's laugh was bitter, the sound of someone who had learned hard lessons about the cost of willful blindness. "It was easier than believing I was the kind of person who helps destroy a family." If you were crazy, if you were a bad mother, then what we were doing wasn't so wrong. It was almost noble, saving those poor children from an abusive situation. She looked up, and Maggie was surprised to see tears streaming down her face. I know how that sounds. I know what you must think of me. But I believed him. He was so convincing, so sincere. He cried when he talked about how worried he was. He showed me documents, evidence of your instability. I thought I was falling in love with a man trapped in a terrible marriage to a dangerous woman. Maggie studied the woman across from her, the other woman, the homewrecker, the enemy, but also she was beginning to realize another victim, another woman caught in Daniel's web of lies. What changed, she asked. I started seeing things that didn't match what he told me. Brittany wiped her eyes with a napkin. He said you were violent, but I never saw any evidence of that. He said you neglected the kids, but every time I looked at pictures on his phone, they looked happy and healthy and loved. He said you were an alcoholic, but the wine bottles he photographed, there was never more than what a normal person might drink. She took a shaky breath. Then I started noticing how he talked about you when he thought I wasn't really listening. Little comments, dismissive things, not about how dangerous you were, but about how pathetic, how boring, how ordinary. That's when I started to wonder if I was hearing about the same woman he had described. Maggie felt something shift in her chest, something that had been hard and unyielding for months, a wall she had built to protect herself from the pain of betrayal. Why are you telling me this? She asked. What do you want? To warn you about what he's planning. Brittany leaned forward, her voice dropping. I work at the firm. I hear things. He doesn't know I've been paying attention, but I have. What have you heard? He's coaching witnesses. More than you know. That neighbor, Dorothy Chen, he's been paying her for months. I've seen the checks. $500 every time she provides documentation against you. Maggie had suspected as much, but hearing confirmation was different. It solidified the extent of Daniel's conspiracy against her. There are others too, Brittany continued. The receptionist at your pediatrician's office, a woman named Sandra at the kids' school, people positioned to provide testimony about your supposed instability. Why would they agree to lie for Gwen? Because he's charming, because he promises them things, because they believe him when he says he's trying to protect his children from a dangerous situation. Brittany's hands tightened around her cup. I believed him too, remember? The coffee grew cold while Brittany talked about strategy sessions with Knox that she had overheard through thin office walls, about documents she had seen on Daniel's computer when he left it unlocked, about the web of manipulation he had constructed over more than a year. But the most important information came at the end. There's something else, Brittany said, her voice barely above a whisper. Something you really need to know. Tell me. He has a backup plan. If the custody case goes badly, if he thinks he's going to lose, she took a deep breath. He's prepared to take the kids and disappear. Maggie's blood turned to ice. What do you mean disappear? He has accounts in the Cayman Islands, untraceable money that he's been moving for months. He has fake identification documents for himself and the children. He has a plane ticket, open-ended, that he can activate whenever he wants. A flight risk. Daniel was prepared to kidnap their children and vanish if things went wrong. How do you know this? Maggie asked, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her. Because he told me about a month ago. He was drunk and angry about how the case was going, ranting about how unfair everything was. Brittany's eyes were haunted. He said if the judge ruled against him, he would rather disappear than let you win. He said he'd take the kids somewhere you'd never find them and start over. The information changed everything. Flight risk was a serious allegation, one that could result in restricted custody, supervised visitation, surrendered passports. If she could prove it, Daniel would never have unsupervised access to Emma and Lucas again. Why are you telling me this? Maggie asked again. You know this will destroy him. Because I finally looked in the mirror and saw who I had become. Tears spilled down Brittany's cheeks. I spent 18 months helping a man destroy his family because I believed his lies. I let myself be used. I let myself become a weapon against you and your children. She looked down at her pregnant belly. And because of this, The baby is Daniel's. Brittany's laugh was broken. I don't know. I was seeing someone else before Daniel. I ended it when things got serious with him. But the timing, she shrugged helplessly. It could be either man's child. I haven't told Daniel that. I haven't told him anything because when I tried to talk to him about the baby 2 weeks ago, when I told him I wasn't sure about the paternity, she trailed off, but Maggie could see something in her eyes. Fear. Real fear. What happened? He hit me. The words were barely audible. Grabbed my arm and slammed me against the wall and told me I had ruined everything. Said the baby was his whether I liked it or not, and if I said anything to anyone about questions of paternity, he would make sure I lost everything. She pushed up her sleeve, revealing the yellow-green remnants of a bruise that wrapped around her forearm. I called in sick to work for a week so people wouldn't see. Told everyone I had the flu. Maggie looked at the marks on Brittany's arm, at the fear in her eyes, at the desperate courage it must have taken to come here today and confess to the wife of the man who had turned violent. She thought about what she had planned for this meeting, the cutting remarks, the righteous anger, the satisfaction of confronting the woman who had helped destroy her marriage. Instead, she reached across the table and took Brittany's hand. He hits you, you don't go back, she said firmly. Ever. I don't care about what happened between us. I don't care about the past. But you do not go back to a man who puts his hands on you. Do you understand? Brittany stared at her, tears flowing freely now. Why, she whispered. Why would you help me, after everything I've done? Maggie thought about the question, about who she had been before all of this started, about who she was becoming, about the difference between justice and revenge, and whether there was still a line between them. Because someone should have helped me, she said finally, months ago. Years ago, someone should have seen what was happening and said something. And I'm not going to be the person who stays silent, when another woman is in danger. She squeezed Brittany's hand, and because I'm not him, I will not become him, no matter how much he deserves whatever's coming. They sat like that for a long moment, two women who should have been enemies, united by the cruelty of the man who had manipulated them both. Thank you, Brittany whispered. Will you testify about what he told you, about the backup plan, about the violence? Brittany hesitated. Fear warred with something else in her eyes. Resolution, maybe. The beginning of the kind of courage that came from having nothing left to lose. Yes, she said finally, I'll testify. Maggie nodded. My attorney will be in touch. And yes? Find somewhere safe to stay, someone you trust, and don't tell Daniel where you are. Brittany gathered her things with shaking hands. At the door, she turned back. I hope you destroy him, she said. I really, truly do. I intend to. The door closed behind her. Maggie sat alone in the coffee shop for a long time, watching the late afternoon light shift through the windows. Then she called Christine. We need to move up the timeline. I have new information, and we need to act before Daniel figures out what's coming. Day 3 of the custody hearing. The courtroom was packed. Every seat in the gallery filled with spectators who had heard rumors about what was happening in courtroom 3. Word had spread through the legal community like wildfire. The Holloway case had become the most watched divorce proceeding in Westchester County. Maggie sat at the defendant's table, her face composed, her hands steady on the worn wood. The woman who had baked cookies at 3 in the morning was invisible now. In her place was someone harder, sharper, forged in months of fire and fury. Christine stood. Your Honor, the defense calls Graham Fletcher. Knox was on his feet immediately, his face flushed. Your Honor, the defense has not properly disclosed this witness. We request time to prepare for cross-examination. Mr. Fletcher was disclosed in our amended filing 4 days ago, Christine replied calmly. I believe opposing counsel received the same delivery as everyone else. Perhaps he should check with his mailroom. A ripple of laughter from the gallery. Knox's face darkened. Judge Ashford's expression remained neutral. The witness was properly disclosed. Overruled. You may proceed, Ms. Palmer. Graham took the stand, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he settled into the witness chair. His folder was even thicker than it had been in Christine's office, packed with evidence that had taken months to compile. Mr. Fletcher, what is your profession? I'm a forensic accountant specializing in complex financial investigations. I've worked with law enforcement agencies, family courts, and private clients for over 20 years. And have you had occasion to examine the financial records relevant to this case? I have. What did you find? Graham opened his folder. The courtroom leaned forward as one, sensing that something significant was about to happen. I found a systematic pattern of financial fraud extending over approximately 3 years. Graham said, his voice as calm as if he were discussing the weather. This pattern involves shell companies, falsified trust documents, and the misappropriation of approximately $4.3 million. The gallery erupted. Judge Ashford banged her gavel, calling for order. Daniel had gone gray, his carefully maintained composure cracking for the first time. Graham walked through the evidence with methodical precision. The fake asset management company with its mailbox address and foreign answering service. The series of shell corporations that moved money through untraceable channels. The diverted funds that had paid for apartments and jewelry and Daniel's partnership at the firm. And to be clear, Mr. Fletcher, Christine said, what was the source of these misappropriated funds? The estate of the late Judge William Reeves, Mrs. Holloway's father. And who was the primary beneficiary of the fraudulent transfers? The plaintiff, Daniel Holloway. The money funded his personal expenses, his partnership investment at Mercer and Associates, and various purchases that appear to have been gifts for individuals other than his wife. Maggie watched Daniel's face as the truth came out. She had imagined this moment for months, had rehearsed how it would feel to watch his world collapse. She had expected satisfaction, triumph, the sweet taste of revenge. Instead, she felt tired, sad. Watching a man she had once loved revealed as nothing more than a petty thief and manipulator. Knox called for a recess. Judge Ashford denied it. Your Honor, my client needs time to prepare a response to these allegations. Your client has had 3 years to prepare, Mr. Knox. We'll continue. The next piece of evidence was even more devastating. Christine entered documents showing the loan Daniel had obtained from the firm 8 months earlier. $400,000, supposedly for home improvements that had never materialized. Mr. Fletcher, were you able to trace where these loan funds went? Partially, a significant portion was converted to cash through various channels. Another portion appears to have been transferred to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Christine turned to the judge. Your Honor, in light of this evidence of hidden offshore assets, combined with testimony we'll present regarding Mr. Holloway's expressed intention to flee the jurisdiction, we request that Mr. Holloway be required to surrender his passport and be prohibited from removing the minor children from the state. The courtroom exploded again. Daniel was standing now, his voice rising over the chaos. This is outrageous. These are lies, fabrications. Mr. Holloway, sit down and control yourself. Judge Ashford's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Any further outbursts and I will have you removed from this courtroom. Daniel sat, his face contorted with rage. Gone was the charming, reasonable man who had testified earlier. In his place was something uglier, something truer. Maggie watched without emotion. She had seen that face before in private moments when Daniel's mask slipped. Now the whole world was seeing it too. Christine called her next witness, Brittany Vance. The young woman entered through a side door, her face pale but determined. She had dressed conservatively, a navy blue dress that did nothing to hide her pregnancy. She did not look at Daniel as she walked to the stand. Her testimony was devastating. She described the affair in clinical terms, including her own culpability. She described Daniel's comments about Maggie, the dismissive cruelty that had gradually awakened her from her willing blindness. She described the documents she had seen on his computer, the strategy sessions she had overheard, and then she described the night he hit her. I told him I wasn't certain about the baby's paternity, Brittany said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. He grabbed my arm and slammed me against the wall. He told me the baby was his, whether I liked it or not, and if I said anything, he would destroy me. She pushed up her sleeve, showing the gallery the faded bruises that still marked her arm. He told me something else that night, she continued. He said if the custody case went against him, he would take the children and disappear. He said he had accounts in the Caymans and identification documents prepared. He said he would rather vanish than let Margaret win. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Even the reporters in the back had stopped writing, frozen by the weight of what they were hearing. Christine approached the bench with the final piece of evidence. Your Honor, I have one more item to enter into the record. It concerns the ownership structure of Mercer and Associates, the firm where Mr. Holloway is currently employed. She handed a folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Ashford reviewed the documents, her face revealing nothing. Mr. Holloway, she said finally, were you aware that 6 months ago, your law firm was acquired by an investment group? Daniel blinked, confusion temporarily replacing his rage. Yes, Richard mentioned something about new investors, but I don't see what that has to do with. Were you aware that the majority stakeholder of that investment group is Margaret Holloway? The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Daniel's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally understanding. She's your employer, Mr. Holloway, Judge Ashford continued. Her voice was calm, almost conversational. Has been for 6 months. While you were sitting in your office building your case against her, every email you sent was company property. Every document you created was company property. Every strategy session conducted in conference rooms that belonged to your wife. Daniel's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came. Maggie sat perfectly still and watched 17 years of marriage collapse into rubble. She did not smile, did not gloat. There was no satisfaction in this, she realized, only the grim necessity of survival. There's more in these documents, isn't there, Ms. Palmer? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor. Emails from Mr. Holloway's work account detailing his witness coaching strategy, payment records for the individuals who provided false testimony, internal communications about the offshore accounts and escape plans. Judge Ashford reviewed the final documents in silence. When she looked up, her eyes found Daniel. Mr. Holloway, in all my years on the bench, I have seen many things: greed, cruelty, deception, but I don't think I have ever seen anything quite as calculated as what has been presented here today. She removed her glasses and set them carefully on the bench. You spent 14 months building a case to prove your wife was unfit. You stole her inheritance. You coached witnesses to lie. You prepared to kidnap your children if things went badly. And all the while you sat in a building she owned, conducting your campaign of destruction under her roof. She shook her head slowly. I knew your wife's father. Judge William Reeves was one of the finest men I ever had the privilege to know. He used to say that the law exists to protect the weak from the strong, the honest from the corrupt. I think he would be proud of what his daughter has accomplished here. She turned to Daniel's attorney. Mr. Knox, does your client have anything to say before I render my decision? Knox looked at Daniel, who was staring at Maggie with an expression she could not quite read. Hatred, yes. Fear, but something else too. Respect, perhaps. Or the bewilderment of a predator who has discovered, too late, that his prey has become the hunter. No, Your Honor, Knox said quietly. Judge Ashford called a brief recess before delivering her final ruling. The gallery buzzed with whispered conversations, reporters frantically texting their editors, spectators turning to each other with wide eyes and exclamations of disbelief. Maggie stood in the hallway outside the courtroom, her back against the cool marble wall. Christine handed her a bottle of water. How are you holding up? I don't know. The answer was honest. She had imagined this moment for 6 months, had planned every detail, anticipated every contingency. But now that it was here, she felt strangely hollow. It's almost over, Christine said. 1 more hour, maybe less. 1 more hour, and then what? What did life look like on the other side of this moment? The bailiff called everyone back into the courtroom. The gallery filled quickly, no one wanting to miss the conclusion of the drama that had been unfolding for 3 days. Judge Ashford returned to the bench. She arranged her papers carefully, took a sip of water, and looked out at the assembled crowd. I've had an opportunity to review all the evidence presented in this matter, she began. Her voice was measured, professional, the voice of someone who had delivered thousands of verdicts over 30 years on the bench. Let me be direct. In 30 years of presiding over family court cases, I have rarely seen a more disturbing pattern of behavior than what has been presented here. What Mr. Holloway has done goes beyond the usual acrimony of divorce proceedings. It constitutes a systematic campaign of abuse, manipulation, and fraud. She turned to Daniel. He was smaller now, shrunken in his expensive suit. The charming mask had crumbled completely, leaving something pitiful behind. Mr. Holloway, you came into my courtroom and called your wife an unfit mother. You called her mentally unstable. You called her a threat to her own children. She paused. The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. You did this while systematically stealing her inheritance, while coaching witnesses to lie under oath, while hiding assets in offshore accounts, while preparing to flee the country with your children if the law did not give you what you wanted. Daniel's attorney put a restraining hand on his arm as he started to speak. Mrs. Holloway, the judge continued, turning to Maggie, I knew your father. He was my mentor when I was a young law clerk, just starting out in this profession. He taught me that justice isn't about punishment. It's about truth, about protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Maggie's eyes burned. She had not expected this. Your father would be proud of you today, not because you won, because you sought the truth when it would have been easier to accept lies, because you protected your children when their other parent would have sacrificed them for his own advantage, because you fought back against systematic abuse with intelligence and determination rather than sinking to the level of your abuser. The ruling came swiftly after that. Full custody of Emma and Lucas Holloway awarded to their mother. Supervised visitation only for Daniel Holloway, pending investigation by the district attorney's office. All marital assets frozen pending complete forensic accounting. The family residence awarded to Maggie and the children permanently. Criminal referral to the district attorney for charges including fraud, embezzlement, witness tampering, and domestic violence. Daniel's passport ordered surrendered to the court. He was prohibited from leaving the state or having unsupervised contact with his children, pending further proceedings. Mr. Holloway, Judge Ashford concluded, you spent 14 months and considerable resources trying to prove your wife was unfit to raise your children. In the process, you proved something quite different. She put her glasses back on and looked at him directly. You proved that you are not fit to be in the same room with your children without supervision. You proved that your judgment is fatally corrupted by greed and entitlement. And you proved that the only person in this courtroom who was ever a genuine threat to those children was you. The gavel fell. The sound was final. Absolute. This court is adjourned. What followed was chaos. Bailiffs moved toward Daniel to collect his passport. Knox was shouting about appeals and due process. Patricia Holloway was crying in the gallery, her careful makeup running in dark rivers down her cheeks. Daniel looked at Maggie. For a long moment, their eyes met across the courtroom. She saw hatred there, and fear, and the bewildered fury of a man who could not understand how his careful plans had collapsed so completely. But she also saw something else, recognition, an acknowledgement, however grudging, that he had finally met someone he could not manipulate or control. The bailiffs led him away. He went without resistance, his shoulders slumped, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume he no longer knew how to wear. Maggie watched him go. She thought she would feel triumph, satisfaction, the sweet taste of revenge after everything he had put her through. Instead, she felt tired, relieved, grief for the man she had thought she married, the life she had thought she was building, the family that would never be whole again. But also something else, something lighter. Freedom. She was free. Christine appeared beside her, grinning despite obvious exhaustion. You did it. You actually did it. We did it, Maggie corrected. I couldn't have done any of this without you. That's what friends are for. Christine hugged her tightly. Now let's go get your kids. The courthouse steps were bathed in late afternoon sunlight, warm and golden against the gray stone. It was the same building where Maggie's father had worked for 35 years, dispensing justice from the bench, trying to make the world a little fairer one case at a time. She stood at the top of the steps, looking down at the street below. Cars passed, people walked by. Somewhere a dog barked. Life continued, indifferent to the seismic shift that had just occurred in courtroom 3. For a moment, she imagined her father standing beside her, his gentle voice, the smell of his pipe tobacco, the weight of his hand on her shoulder. Well done, Magpie. Well done. Christine emerged from the building behind her. Your mother's here. She's parking. 5 minutes later, a familiar minivan pulled into the lot. The sliding door opened before the vehicle had fully stopped. Lucas was running before his feet touched the pavement, an 8-year-old blur of energy and relief and joy. Mom! Mom! Maggie caught him, lifting him off the ground despite his size. His arms wrapped around her neck, his face buried in her shoulder, his entire body trembling with the force of emotions he was too young to fully understand. It's okay, baby. It's okay. I'm here. I'm always going to be here. Emma followed more slowly. 12 years old and trying so hard to be mature, to not need the same reassurance her little brother needed. But her eyes were bright with tears she was barely holding back. Come here, sweetheart. Emma walked into her mother's arms. For a long moment, the three of them stood together on the courthouse steps, holding each other against everything that had tried to tear them apart. Donna Reeves stood by the minivan, tears streaming down her weathered face. Maggie's mother, who had never liked Daniel, who had bitten her tongue for 17 years because she wanted her daughter to be happy, who had been waiting for this moment with a patience that must have cost her dearly. Your father would be so proud, Donna said. Her voice cracking and so incredibly proud. The words cracked something open in Maggie's chest. The tears came then. Finally, the tears she had been fighting to hold back since that night in March when she found the texts on Daniel's phone. They were not sad tears. Not entirely. They were relief. The tears of someone who had walked through fire and emerged, scarred but whole on the other side. Can we go home now? Lucas asked, his voice muffled against her shoulder. I miss my room. I miss my toys. I miss sleeping in my own bed. Home. The word had never sounded so beautiful. Yes, baby. We can go home. 3 months later, December. Snow was falling outside the windows of the house in Westchester. The house Maggie had grown up in, the house her father had left her along with the money Daniel had tried to steal. She had brought her children here in September, moved into the rooms where she had once been a child herself. It felt right, like coming home after a very long journey. Maggie sat at her father's desk in the study, surrounded by his books and papers and photographs. The room still smelled faintly of pipe tobacco, a ghost of scent that she could not bear to eliminate. Some reminders of the past were worth keeping. The phone rang, Christine's number on the display. The plea deal went through, Christine said without preamble. 5 years. He'll serve 3 with good behavior. 3 years for stealing $4.7 million, for coaching witnesses, for planning to kidnap his children, for 17 years of lies. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. It was justice as much as the system could provide. And Brittany? The DNA test came back. The baby isn't Daniel's. She's moved to Vermont living with her parents. She asked me to thank you. For what? For showing her that she could be brave. Her words, not mine. Maggie thought about the coffee shop, about the frightened young woman who had come to warn her, risking everything, about the strange solidarity that had formed between them. Tell her she's welcome, and tell her to take care of that baby. I will. They talked for a few more minutes. Details about the divorce settlement, which was finally being wrapped up. The sale of the old house, which had closed last week. The liquidation of Daniel's partnership share, which would add another significant amount to Maggie's accounts. When she hung up, Maggie sat in silence for a long time, watching the snow fall outside the window. A knock at the study door interrupted her thoughts. Mom? Emma's voice. Dinner's ready. Lucas picked the movie. I'll be right there. She stood, stretching muscles that had grown stiff from sitting. Outside the window, the snow was accumulating now, covering the lawn in a blanket of white. Fresh, clean, a new beginning. The living room was warm with lamplight and the smell of pizza. Lucas had arranged himself on the floor, surrounded by pillows, the remote control clutched in his hand like a scepter. Emma was setting plates on the coffee table, a task she had claimed as her own since they moved into the new house. I got pepperoni, Lucas announced proudly, and Emma got that weird vegetable one. It's called Supreme, and it's not weird. It has green peppers on it. That's weird. Language, Maggie said automatically, then smiled. Some arguments were too familiar to fight. They ate pizza on the living room floor, the way they had done every Friday night since Maggie was a child in this house. The movie was something Lucas had chosen, animated and loud and exactly right for a winter evening. Halfway through, Lucas fell asleep against Maggie's shoulder. His snores were soft, rhythmic, the sound of a child who felt safe enough to let go of consciousness completely. Emma caught her eye during a quiet moment in the film. "You good, Mom?" The question carried weight. "Are you okay? Are we okay? Is this really finally over?" Maggie thought about everything. The 17 years of marriage, the lies and betrayals, the discovery and the fear, the rage that had consumed her. The plan she had executed with cold precision. She thought about the woman she had been, patient, trusting, willing to see the best in people even when the evidence suggested otherwise. She thought about the woman she had become, harder, sharper, capable of things she never would have imagined. Both versions of herself had value. Both had brought her to this moment, sitting on a floor covered with pizza boxes, with her children safe beside her, and a future that belonged entirely to her. "Yeah, sweetheart," she said. "I'm good." The movie played on. The snow fell softly outside. Lucas snored against her shoulder while Emma laughed at something on screen. Maggie realized with a start that almost felt like surprise that she was happy, actually genuinely, completely happy, not despite everything she had gone through, but because of who it had made her become. She was not the woman Daniel had married. That woman had been kind, but naive, trusting to the point of blindness. She would have crumbled under the weight of betrayal, would have accepted defeat because fighting back seemed too hard. This woman was different. This woman had looked into the darkness and found the strength to fight. This woman had protected her children against someone who should have protected them too. This woman owned her own life, her own truth, her own power. She always had. She just forgot for a while. The movie ended. Lucas stirred but did not wake. Emma yawned enormously and announced she was going to bed. "Love you, Mom." "Love you too, sweetheart, more than anything." Maggie carried Lucas up to his room, the stairs creaking in the familiar way they had creaked since she was a child. She tucked him in, pulled the covers up to his chin, kissed his forehead. His elephant was tucked under his arm, the same stuffed toy he had slept with since he was 2 years old. Some things stayed constant, even when everything else changed. She stood in the doorway for a long moment watching her son sleep. Safe, peaceful, home. Then she checked on Emma, already burrowed under her covers with a book. Her history textbook was on the nightstand, open to a chapter about the Industrial Revolution, the same subject she had been studying that night in March when everything changed. "Good night, sweetheart." "Night, Mom." Maggie walked downstairs slowly, taking her time. The house was quiet now, the way it used to be quiet when she was young, and her parents thought she was asleep. A peaceful quiet, a safe quiet. She cleaned up the pizza boxes, washed the plates, turned off the lights one by one until only the lamp in the living room remained, casting warm shadows across the familiar furniture. She sat in her father's armchair, the one with the worn leather and the slight depression where he had spent countless hours reading and thinking and simply existing in this space he had loved. The snow had stopped falling. Outside the window, the world was white and still, waiting for whatever came next. Maggie thought about Daniel, in his prison cell, 3 hours away. She wondered if he was sleeping, if he was staring at the ceiling, replaying every mistake, every miscalculation, every moment where he had underestimated the woman he had married. She hoped he was awake. She hoped he understood finally what he had lost. Not her. She had never really been his to lose. But his children, his career, his reputation, his freedom, the life he had built on lies and manipulation and the systematic destruction of everyone who trusted him. All of it gone. All of it traded for the momentary pleasure of feeling powerful, of controlling the people around him, of winning games that only he knew were being played. She did not feel sorry for him. She was not certain she felt anything for him at all anymore. He was simply a chapter in her story that had finally ended. A long, dark chapter full of pain and fear, and the kind of betrayal that leaves scars. But it was over now. Maggie rose from the chair and walked to the window. Her reflection looked back at her from the dark glass, superimposed over the snow-covered lawn. She studied the woman in the reflection, the tired eyes, the determined set of the jaw, the hint of a smile that was beginning to form. "Well done, Magpie," she whispered to herself, using her father's nickname for her. "Well done." Tomorrow would bring new challenges, bills to pay, children to raise, a life to rebuild from the ground up. There would be hard days and easy days, victories and defeats, moments of doubt and moments of certainty. But tonight she could rest. Tonight she had earned her peace. The woman in the window smiled back at her, and Maggie smiled in return. Then she turned off the last lamp and walked up the stairs to bed, leaving the darkness and the silence and the past behind her. The future was waiting, and for the first time in a very long time, she could not wait to see what came next. And that is how Maggie Holloway went from a wife being destroyed in court to the woman who owned her husband's entire career. If this story moved you, if you felt her pain and cheered for her victory, do me a small favor. Hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done in her situation. And if you have not subscribed yet, join our family. We share stories like this every week. Stories of women who refuse to stay silent. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Until next time.